Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the 9th film from Quentin Tarantino. He's going to stop at 10, or maybe he's going to stop now, as he's been kind of alluding recently. We're not really sure yet, but this film stars Leonardo DiCaprio as an actor, Rick Dalton, and his stunt double, Cliff Booth, is played by Brad Pitt. And these two are in the year 1969 of Hollywood. Rick Dalton is feeling very doubtful of himself because he's starting to notice things about his career that he just doesn't really like. He thinks he's not going anywhere, and Cliff Booth is also trying to find his way in this life of his now. And all of this is going on while the backdrop of the Charles Manson cult and Sharon Tate is also going on. I was really excited for this film. There's really no Quentin Tarantino movie, save for Death Proof, which I don't like. There's really no Quentin Tarantino movie that I just like. Literally all of his movies I end up loving. Literally all of his films, except for Death Proof, I have given my highest grade to. I think they're all amazing films. Quentin Tarantino is one of my favorite directors. When all of his films, again, except for Death Proof, end up in like the top 100 of my attempting to rank every film I've ever seen ever list on Letterboxd, that's a pretty good sign, to say the least. So I walked into this film very ecstatic. I couldn't wait to see what Tarantino was going to do, not just with these characters, but also how he was going to handle the time period, because very sensitive area there as far as taking a subject matter and making it into a movie. This is a very sensitive thing, so wondering how he's going to pull that off is very interesting, to say the least. But I walked out amazed by this movie. I absolutely adored it. It's one of my favorite films of the year. It's another fantastic film for the catalog that is Quentin Tarantino's filmography. Whenever Quentin Tarantino hints at retirement, I always get a little depressed because no one really makes movies like him. The direction he takes on this film is fantastic. There's a lot of scenes that I think a lot of people might complain are too boring or too dialogue heavy, but I think it's perfectly well done. Honestly, every piece of the dialogue I just enjoyed so much. Every single line these characters said I thought was delivered so well. As per Tarantino's directing of the actors, I think he got the best performances out of everyone, and his writing is just off the charts awesome. Like, he took an entire day of these different people's lives, and he stretched that out for a long period of time, like for the majority of the second act, and I was into it like the entire time, pretty much. There was really no moment where I felt bored. There are times where you can kind of notice like it's going a little bit slower, but I always knew that it was like for some intentional reason, like they're either stretching it out for the sake of like a comedic moment, or they're stretching it out for the sake of tension. So Tarantino once again wrote and directed another excellent film. The cinematography is really well done. There's a lot of great shots here. I believe this is another one that was shot on film as per Tarantino's request for a lot of the movies he does, which is perfect because it gives that perfect look to it. Because there's also moments where he's directing like the people living their days, but then they'll also cut to something that's like an actual TV show from the time or a movie from that time, and it's framed up exactly how you'd expect it to be. It's got the perfect grain to it as well. He's really done a really good job of transporting you, immersing you into the 1969 environment. As far as this designing of the sets too, everything looks really well done, because it's not really a set per se. It's actually actual places in California decorated to look like the 1960s again, which is pretty outstanding that he has the talent and money to actually get that done, but he does, and it's perfect. He is able to fully capture your investment in that case. You're fully transported into the world. The movie definitely goes in some interesting places story-wise that I absolutely adored. If you're willing to go with it, I think some people might walk out disappointed because it's not going to go the way they expected to. This is definitely a movie that I was worried, like, okay, how are you going to treat this subject matter? Very sensitive issue. What are you going to do? He went the Inglourious Basterds approach, of course, but it was excellent. Like, I loved it. It was such a great idea to incorporate that, but also have it affect the characters in a way that actually closes out their arcs pretty well. Because as much of a great director as Tarantino is, as much of a fantastic writer he is, this movie would not work at all if it weren't for the lead actors in this film. First of all, Leonardo DiCaprio as Rick Dalton is outstanding here. I don't want to be one of those guys that, like, because this is like the end of July, like, we're not even close to, like, the Oscar season yet, but I really hope he gets an Oscar nomination. Just in general, he's so goddamn good in, like, every movie I've seen from him, but also the fact that in this movie, he has to play it so straight. He's a character that's really down, and he's really depressed about where his life is going, where he thinks it's going, so you're able to empathize with him because it's something that you can relate to, like anyone can really relate to, but the way he plays it, the way he just gets mad at himself, and just starts to like complain and whine is actually, it's taken so seriously and so straight, but he's saying like the most jokey stuff, but he's not in on that joke. So not really is it a performance that you can empathize with, but it's also one that's just hilarious. And it's so funny. Like, Leonardo DiCaprio has such a great range as an actor, and this just kind of proves it. Even though I feel like if you've seen a bunch of other movies from him, you'd know already at this point that he's got great range, but this movie also, once again, proves that. Brad Pitt is probably my favorite character in the movie as Cliff Booth. He's a very chillax guy, very go with the flow. He's got a past, for sure, but it gave that character so much more, and it made the character interesting. And Brad Pitt's performance, he's got some funny jokes in this movie. I guess you could say he's the funniest part of this whole thing. If you could designate one character as the comedic relief, it's him. He's got so many great funny moments here, and he's just such a great joy to see on screen, and him and DiCaprio have such a great chemistry with each other. This movie is really about them and their friendship and how their lives are going and how maybe it's not going the way they thought they would, and kind of trying to adjust to that. And that's a really great theme. This is honestly surprisingly Tarantino's sweetest movie out of all of his movies that he's made. Like, this movie, as much as it does feel like a Tarantino movie, it also doesn't at the same time. Like, there's a lot of Tarantino mannerisms that you can see throughout the movies that he makes that are kind of died down for this one specifically. Like, there's not a whole lot of violence in this until like the last 20 minutes of the movie, and even then it's not as bad as other movies that you've seen from him before. But toning that stuff down works especially for this movie. Like, it wouldn't have worked all that much if it was just a lot of the typical Tarantino stuff that you've seen before. And in a way, I'm kind of glad to see Tarantino kind of challenged himself to kind of change his style up, not entirely obviously, but just a little bit, so that the movie actually impacts in just the right way. There's a lot of controversy behind Margot Robbie portraying Sharon Tate, not because of her, but because it doesn't seem like she has much to do. According to a lot of people, after it premiered at like a film festival, Tarantino added more scenes, and even now people are still kind of complaining about her involvement with the film. And I can understand people kind of being upset by that, because maybe they were sold on the fact that this is a Charles Manson movie, but they didn't realize that it's actually not really about that, and that stuff is actually the backdrop of this whole thing. And I can kind of understand why people would be upset, because they don't get a lot of Sharon Tate, like her whole biography, but this is not really about her. Even from the get-go, you get that. Like, it's about these two, Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth, from the start. So I already kind of figured that. Like, the movie opens with these two. I kind of figured they'd take up more screen time, but also, as far as her character goes, whenever they cut to her scenes, I always just saw it as a nice little contrast of her and Rick Dalton, like, as far as like what their lives are at this moment in Hollywood, and how a lot of people just see her as the bright-eyed, optimistic actress, and kind of how Hollywood is to a lot of people. As far as like, it's just filled with these great people that are just so, oh gosh darn excited to be in movies, but then you contrast it with Rick Dalton, who's miserable. That's why it didn't really bother me so much. I think Margot Robbie did a good job portraying Sharon Tate. I can understand, though, the issues that some people have with it, but honestly, it didn't really bother me, because I kind of saw like what Tarantino was trying to do with that character, like as far as the overall theme of the movie, and also where it eventually goes, that I don't really want to talk about too much because it might spoil some things for you, but it's a nice little bait and switch that they do as well. Once again, the Charles Manson stuff is a backdrop, and this movie isn't really about that in depth. There's going to be some Inglourious Bastard stuff that happens that you honestly instantly can see, like, okay, that definitely didn't happen. But at the same time, the movie is called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, so the idea that this is definitely a fictionalized tale of the story, you know, it kind of presents itself very early on. Like, we're following two characters that don't exist in real life, but they feel like they could. Obviously, they have the Tarantino quippy dialogue, and they're really funny, but because of the actors portraying them, you almost get the sense that they could be real people that you would have seen in this time period as well. I guess you could say that their characters really do represent other people in that time period very well, as far as how they were feeling and what they were going through in the industry of Hollywood. So I really enjoyed this movie. The acting is fantastic, especially from Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton. I think these two definitely deserve some awards recognition for their performances, because they're just so gosh darn good. Quentin Tarantino's writing definitely needs something, because I think he paces out every scene exactly how it needs to be, and I feel like every scene is there for a purpose. The direction from him is fantastic. He has a style, but he toned it down. He challenged himself to change it up a bit, and he did, and the movie is all the better for it. As you can see, I really adored this thing. I don't really have any issues with this movie. I know that it's kind of common for me when it comes to Quentin Tarantino movies that I don't really have anything negative to say, but I just don't have anything negative to say about the majority of them. Again, save for Death Proof, because he's just got a really interesting style to him. He's a very unique individual, and the stories he tells are the kind of stories that I love, and are the kind of stories that structure-wise and dialogue-wise are the kind of ones that I'd like to tell in the future. Literally every movie I see from him, I get inspired either as wanting to be a director or even an actor when you see the performances he's able to get out, or just more importantly, the writing. I'm gonna give Once Upon a Time in Hollywood an A+. I was never really bored by this movie. You can definitely pinpoint when he's intentionally dragging certain things out for an emotional impact, comedy, or tension, but I think he's all the smarter for that. I think his direction was really on point here, and he did everything exactly how he should have, and I was really not bothered by a single thing in this movie. Once again, I can understand why some people might be bothered by it, but I think that might be expectations rather than what you actually get from the movie, and I think as time goes on, certain flaws that people have now might not be flaws in the future. They might think of, oh yeah, well that was just me going in expecting one thing, but it was actually this the whole time. It's actually really good. But if you've seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.